What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to talk about a few things going on in the Star Wars gaming space, as well as a little bit of Marvel as well, kind of create a conversation as this video goes on. What I first want to touch upon is this rumor, and this comes from a journalist who actually leaked Star Wars Eclipse. I don't know much about the individual, so obviously take it with a grain of salt, but it could absolutely be right. So I do want to start here. I think the conversation can kind of get bigger than this, and that's where we're going to go for the rest of the video. So we have this tweet that says, apparently EA wants to make more Star Wars games, but they need lightsabers. This is the reason why EA canceled Respawn's Star Wars FPS game. They were apprehensive it wouldn't pay off, and again, it's via the journalist who also leaked Star Wars Eclipse. Okay, so before I forget, I do just want to kind of throw this in here. I don't necessarily doubt that generally. However, you do have, and I don't know if it's officially confirmed, but you do have the XCOM developers that are doing that strategy game. And of course, you can think back to Empire at War, right? Or, Republic Commandos is probably a really good example too of like shooter, and then, Empire at War more strategy. But I get it. Like, I could see how fans wouldn't necessarily buy a game that doesn't have a lightsaber. I think that could be true. I don't know that for sure, but I think that could be true. But again, I don't know how true it is. It maybe for EA it's possible, but maybe for other developers, like, they're willing to take a shot at it, right? You also have Ubisoft, right? So I guess technically you have a strategy game that literally is in the works. But then you also have Ubisoft with Star Wars Outlaws. Now, maybe that really will be a really big test, not just necessarily for them, but maybe for the industry at large. If developers or publishers really think that, and again, I wouldn't doubt that they do, but if they really think that, I wonder if they're looking out at Outlaws. Now, you have to look at it more than just like a broad thing, right? Because it's a Ubisoft game, anything could happen, both good or bad. Ubisoft has made some okay games recently, but they've also made some bad ones. So if it succeeds, if it fails, I think you really have to try to isolate the reasons why. And maybe the bounty hunter-like thing is a big reason why, right? That kind of mechanic versus lightsabers. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But this does go into something else I kind of want to talk about, where I think this was Tom Henderson who kind of did a report about, I think he was talking about Titanfall 3, or, it's kind of the time for some of these EA studios to pivot. And he talked to a source, and the source had said that basically Star Wars games are just too expensive. Getting the license for it might take 20 to 25%. Like, you need to add that on top of everything else. So if you have a budget, say, of $200 million, then maybe you need to add in an extra whatever, 50 or so million, right, for the licensing fee just to then use it. And they brought up the example of like, well, Battlefronts, plural, the EA DICE ones, they actually outsold the last several Battlefield games. However, because of that margin, because Battlefield, you don't have to pay anything extra, there's no fee. Because you do with Star Wars, they were kind of even, revenue, and maybe even Battlefield made more. And, then there's the talk. You can think about Midnight Suns for Marvel's, point of view. We've talked about this before with the Insomniac leaks, right? Like, we see how expensive these Marvel deals can cost, $200-300 million. They can be very, very hard for companies to break. So in terms of the larger picture, I want to just talk about for a few minutes here. I really think they're going to have to lower those fees, because if there is kind of this mindset in the industry, and we can, I guess, focus on Star Wars, but again, it does affect Marvel, and it might affect other things even beyond those two, right? But if you think about that Star Wars story, right, so lightsabers, if they already cost so much, well, number one, games cost a lot to make, right? Number two, you have to pay the licensing fees. Number three, if there is this weird fear that lightsabers, you absolutely need them, and if you don't have them, your game's going to fail, well, those are three pretty, like, you're just not going to get these games anymore. And we have, I think, touched upon that here and there, especially when those Insomniac leaks happen, even for Marvel, even for maybe DC, again, it might be bigger than just these two franchises or IPs. If Marvel is going to charge 50, 70, 90, $100 million just to use their thing, and then you have to make the game, and then the game has to be successful, not just to make that money back, but also to make the money back that you gave to Marvel to use the property in the first place, that is a risky deal, especially now in the gaming industry where there are no risks. You don't want to take risks anymore, right? Because of how bad they can be. And at the same time, ironically, every game is kind of a risk, right? Nobody wants to take risks. And at the same time, any game, a Horizon type game is a risk because that game can cost 200 plus million. And if that game doesn't sell 5-7 million units, right, that game is going to lose Sony tens of millions of dollars. So that is a big deal. I don't know. My main takeaway, honestly, is you gotta, and this is probably not going to happen, you gotta lower those prices. These entry fees to get these IPs have got to be lower because there's already so much risk involved. And then you can kind of focus on like smaller things like do lightsabers. And by the way, again, let me throw it in. I understand it. I think that there might be an audience out there that wouldn't buy a Star Wars game without lightsabers. Even from like now I don't run these businesses, maybe thank God, right? But I actually don't agree. And I actually think that that is the wrong choice to run away from these games as a business of creating these games. Wrong idea to run away and not make them. And I think Star Wars Outlaws could be really good, could sell really well, and again, like historically, we've had games. I mean, like, okay, Empire at War, technically you could put down like heroes, right? And they could so there was a lightsaber, but let's be real, not really. You could look at Battlefront. I mean, like heroes versus villains and being able to play as them. They were so integral. They had their own mode. They could be, played in like a casual match. But let's be real. Most of the Battlefront games you are playing as the soldier. So I don't know. It definitely plays a part, specifically in Battlefront. I think it's harder to kind of make that point. You do have like Force Unleashed, which did really well at the time. You have, the Jedi games right now. But yeah, you had Empire War. You had Republic Commandos. You had many other actually as well. I don't know. I don't know if that's true. And again, like I could see it. My business sense would be don't run away from it. Embrace it. Like you can have cool fighting mechanics, cool gameplay mechanics. You can have those and not be a Jedi or a Sith. You know what I mean? And I think that would work. Same thing for like, does every game need to take place between 3 and 4 or maybe even 2 and 3? I mean, there's a big, deep well of just things you could play around with. I definitely get that, and that's why I think it's done so much. But can you do it outside of that? I think you can. You got to get creative. And I mean, maybe a lot of creatives aren't really in that space right now for these kind of games. I don't know. But it is alarming, and I do think, again, the bigger takeaway, these prices have got to be lowered because ultimately, the thing that's going to happen is you're just not going to see as many Star Wars, Marvel games. If we're just looking at these two examples, you're not going to see as many because you can't take a risk with the Midnight Suns anymore. In fact, they did take a risk and they lost money. They lost a substantial amount of money, and that's never going to happen again. So I like that game, but that's literally what happens. You do something slightly different. Not everybody takes to it, which I think is natural. But not only did it maybe not even make the money back it needed to, now maybe it did, but then you also had to pay Marvel, or you already paid Marvel. You're trying to recoup that cost, and that didn't happen either. So that's what's going to end up happening, down the line. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed, bell icon turned on. I hope to see you all on the next one.